Sorry.
All good. In here. Great. So we're here. I'm going to introduce. Well, they're all standing, so I was going to introduce them after a few opening remarks, but I want to get them all sitting down. So before we even begin, let's introduce our panel. So this is Allison Barr, and Allison. All right, why don't you all come sit down first? Let's just do that. All right, great. So now I'm going to go back to my normal order because you're all sitting down. I just didn't want them all standing over there. Okay, great. So we're here to talk today about how to sell complex innovation. So oftentimes in startup land, we hear Uber for this, Uber for that, but a lot of the times it's not quite so simple. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have either worked for or have tried to start a company where just trying to describe it in a couple of seconds or do that elevator pitch can actually be really. And in fact, let's find out this audience. Who here doesn't have a startup, but they're sort of thinking about doing one? A few people, okay. Who has a startup? All right, that's what I like to see. And who here is just interested in selling within organizations? All right, good. So we got a pretty good mix here. All right, I'm excited. So right now I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. I would like you all to just give a brief bio and tell us an interesting fact about yourself that the audience might not guess from just knowing about you. And then after that, I want you to describe what your product is, what your company is, as if the audience were made up of 5-year-olds. And we'll go a little bit deeper into why we're doing that later. But Allison, you want to take it away?
Sure. Microphone, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Allison Barr. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Ativio. And so an interesting thing about me that's not necessarily on my bio is that I went swimming with sharks in South Africa, which was a fascinating and terrifying experience all at the same time. And then in terms of what Ativio does, we are basically Google for businesses.
All right. My name is Daniel Rodriguez. I'm the head of marketing of a company called Alice, right down the street here in Boston. Interesting fact about me, I used to sing in a cover band here in Boston called the Midnight Goggles. So if any of you had seen me, you probably have forgotten because it was midnight and you were wearing beer goggles. Let's see. Oh, what does Alice do to for a 5-year-old to understand? So people really don't like being sold to. So Alice brings joy to the lives of those that are being sold to and to those that are selling.
Cool. That's fascinating. So hi, I'm Ophir, co-founder and CEO of Dust Identity. Something that you probably would not have guessed is that before doing a PhD in applied physics, I worked in graphics in New York, doing animation for television. So Dust Identity, what we do is that we put diamonds on things to give them a unique and clonable identity for product authentication and for supply chain security.
Hi everyone, my name is Nimit. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Votes. Votes is a new elections platform which lets you vote in elections using a smartphone. Something about myself, I race cars to de-stress.
Those were pretty cool. I like those. All right, great. So my first question is for Daniel. So you and Allison are both pretty unique on this panel in that you came to the companies you're at in order to sell an already existing product. That being said, Daniel, you have quite a bit of startup experience already. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference in selling something, not just selling in general, but selling something complicated when it's for your startup versus an organization?
Sure, yeah. So just a little bit more about my background. So I joined Alice a year and a half ago. I was at a software company called Seismic, which is in the sales enablement space. I ran marketing there for 5 years. When I joined Seismic, similar to when I joined Alice, it was very, very early days. There were, I don't know, probably a dozen customers doing a dozen different things with the software, and if you went and asked each of them, why do you use this software and why did you buy it, they might give you a handful of different answers. And that's, I think, a common challenge that a lot of early stage companies have. They believe they are something, and the market tells them with their own words that they're something else. So I do think that this idea of complexity of selling something that already exists, I think in many ways it kind of starts and ends with what are the words that actual other people that are not at your company use to describe the problem that you're solving, rather than what, and this is the default mechanism that people take when they build a product and go to market. They go and they say, these are the widgets and things we built and how they work. So rather than saying, why do you exist, meaning what problem are you solving, people often default to what do we do? And I think that being able to come in from the outside, being a non-technical person as well, I think has helped in both cases at Seismic as well as at Alice, and just being able to more clearly articulate to the market like who you are as a company.
Gotcha. So Daniel just articulated that pretty well in about 30 seconds to a minute, but what he described, the notion of rather than articulating the what you do, but the why you do it, that is the problem you're solving, is more or less a good fraction of business school. So it's actually one of the more important lessons that I think almost everything we talk about today is really going to come back to, is what problem are you solving? So Allison, I have a very similar question to you, which is that you came to Ativio to oversee the launch of a new product on top of an already complicated product. It's not like Ativio was selling Uber for widgets already. They were already selling this very complicated thing. Your job was to come there, add something to that, and continue that explanation. So that just sounds really hard. How did you do that?
Yeah, so again, a little more background about Ativio. The platform's been in the market for about 12 years now. And to Daniel's point, a lot of the marketing and conversation around it was very technical. When I walked in the door, the platform was being described as a cognitive search and insights platform. What does that really mean, right? And so, we were on this adventure to then build a new product on top of the platform that was a packaged application that was supposed to be easier to use, easier to understand and whatnot. And so kind of simultaneously what we had to do was really get down to the bare bones of what the platform is and does and the value that it brings, and then be able to roll up what we were trying to do with the application. So that's where using phrases like Google for Business came into the vernacular, and AI-powered answers and insights for business, really trying to get at the heart of what it does, and then be able to understand what are people doing with it, what is the value that they're getting out of it, and then roll that into what we were trying to do with the new product. So now when we have this packaged application, it's part of a larger ecosystem. It is very easy to implement, to get up and running and to get value really quickly. We're now at a place now we can articulate not only what does that application do, but then our product, our core platform has been a lot easier to describe. So I think it really does come down to understanding what is the value that people are trying to get out of the product, reflecting that back into the marketplace, and then using that as a jumping off place for other things that you're going to do.
Gotcha. So this next question I have is for Nimit, but I want any one of our panelists to jump in because I think it's more or less the goal of today's panel. So selling is, you often hear in startup land, by the way, I might say in startup land 10 times throughout this panel. It's just one of those phrases I love to use. And it really, the reason I use it is because in startup land, there's a lot of consistent things. No matter if you're working for a startup that's gotten 100 million in funding or you're still trying to make a prototype to sell to investors, you're in this world of a lot of like-minded people who come to panels like this. So I call that startup land, and I have a feeling this next question is one that a few of you might want to jump into. But Ophir, you first. Sorry, Nimit, you first, which is, you've told me that your pitch has changed quite a bit since you first started doing it. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we are a new elections company. We let citizens vote on a smartphone, especially those who can't vote the traditional way. And so when we initially started pitching about 4 years ago, we were very gung-ho about the technology, so we would lead with smartphones, biometrics, cryptography, encryption, and blockchain. And as you can expect, we lost our audiences within the first few seconds. And it was very perplexing because we all have a deep tech security background. Like, why don't people get this? It was really funny. And then we kind of went back to the drawing board, got some really good advice from some really awesome advisors, including folks here at CIC. We're actually based here at CIC, so thank you. And we gradually started to modify our pitch and focus more on the problems. And early on, we had interviewed about 900 people over a course of 6 months, mostly voters, election officials, and some politicians. And so we had a large pool of data to lead off. So we reviewed that in detail and eventually started using a pitch where we looked at the problems which voters face and the problems which election officials face. And one by one, we started, using terminology, sentences, simplifying, like literally not talking about the technology and saying, if you're an election official, you have to process absentee ballots on election day manually. That's a huge amount of time. What would you do if we made it easier for you to process those ballots? And that instantly clicked. Similarly for voters, if you're working outside the city, away from your precinct, or your family, or sick in the hospital, you can't really go vote in person. You probably missed the absentee deadline. How do you vote? Do you like to vote on your phone? And so that resonated as well. So I would say over the course of 30 pitches, we finally got to our real pitch, which then also started to resonate with investors. So it was a gradual, step-by-step learning experience. We still evolve our pitch every day whenever we get to pitch. But that was a key learning experience early on.
That's great. Now I noticed you kept on saying that you changed your pitch, but you never actually said the word pivot. So did you pivot, and even if you did or did not, can you clarify, is there a difference between changing your pitch and pivoting the product itself?
Yes, I think that's a great point. We actually didn't pivot, but we narrowed our focus. So when we initially started, we had 6 different verticals we were selling to, and each of them have different election requirements, different security requirements. And we would go tell everybody we can do all of them because we have this great platform. And we quickly realized it's just not possible to do that. Like, it's too vast. And so gradually we started cutting down. As we were evolving our pitch, we also cut down our verticals, and now we only sell to 2 verticals primarily. And so, strictly speaking, we didn't pitch, but we really narrowed our focus now, focusing on governments and political parties, which is also something we learned through this iterative process. So I would say that's kind of the subtle difference between narrowing your focus versus pivoting.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to take on that question?
How many people here? How many people here work for a company that, whether or not it's true, you say you have AI in your technology in your company? So, I like just hearing what you're talking about. One of these big, I think, challenges that people have is like AI is everywhere. It sounds cool, and it seems like you're supposed to be doing it. And if you aren't talking about it in the way that you're selling your product that you're like missing out. You're behind your competitors or something. But I'm evolving how I'm thinking about this now, having now been through this kind of like AI trend with two different companies. And if you are selling a technology where the actual only thing your company does is sell AI tech to other people, right? How many people are at that company? Like the only thing that you sell is your AI that other people then use as their AI, right? Okay, okay, you've got that. Okay, so go do that. Talk about AI, right? And you should just sell AI. I think that actually for most everybody else, we probably are overemphasizing the AI because the AI is not what somebody, to your point, is buying. They're not having a, oh man, I'm really missing out on my AI pain today, right? That's not their pain, right? They just want the thing that was not getting done as well, or the quality of the data thing that is inputting into this that's not getting done as well, to just get done. They don't give a crap how it gets done, right? So, like, when I hear you say that, it makes me think about just how we have, at Alice, we've deprioritized, we are investing in the AI while deprioritizing where AI falls in the positioning that we do.
Well said. And so I think the theme that we are reaching here, which has actually been very well articulated, is the widget isn't as important as the customer pain, as the problem that you're solving. So with that in mind, Ophir, you've had to actually convince more than just one party to want your widget, which I don't want to go too much into. I want you to re-explain it again. But you've had to convince people in government, investors, customers. It has been a research project at some point. It's been startup-ish, where you knew it was going to be a startup, but it hadn't been created yet, and then it's been a startup. So how do you keep a consistent message and still pitch all of these different kinds of players with completely different interests and wants from your product?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that you can't be consistent over time. I think that your consistency will stay within a specific time range where, so we're dealing with supply chain security concerns. The pain points is around hardware security, so knowing where products are coming from, especially if they go into data centers and defense platforms. And in that environment, it's inherent to be multi-stakeholder. We have about 17 different entities that's supposed to consent to a deployment. So to the question about how do you stay consistent is that you focus on what is the key value that we're bringing. And the key value is about the ability to trust things. And from that point on, you can sort of like peel the story or peel the point of view that will be the most interesting or the most applicable to one entity or another. For example, if there's a government entity that acts as a customer to a hardware company, they are not behaving as a border control authority. So their interest in what we're doing is from the perspective of somebody who receives the things. And we'll be able to tailor the story based on, or tailor the pitch based on who they are.
Great. So actually, Allison, we spoke a lot about tailoring pitches to specific parties. So I have a two-part question. One is more of a continuation on his, which is anything you can tell us about, thinking about who your customer is and who you're speaking to. But the second part of that question is, we've been talking about pitching and telling your story as if it's a completely verbal craft, that every time you pitch your startup, it's going to be one-on-one or to a group of people where they can actually hear you talk. But most of the times, in fact, in scaling almost all the time, it's either, if you're lucky, you get video, but most of the time people probably read a 1 to 2 sentence description, maybe a little bit more. So can you tell us about selling innovation when it's not necessarily spoken?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of the first part around continuing to focus on who you're talking to, we've done a lot of work around kind of market research and looking to understand who our target personas are. And you take that information and you do the best you can with it, right? And look at, okay, what are the key value propositions that are going to be important for these different personas? How do you then prioritize the different features that support that and whatnot? But the rubber really meets the road when you start to have those conversations. And you have to be able to iterate very quickly to take what you've learned and incorporate that back into your presentations, your messaging, and whatnot. And so for the new product that we launched at Ativio in the last year, we have a weekly meeting of all the stakeholders across the organization, from sales to marketing to product to support, who come back together every week and say, all right, here's what we learned this week. Here's the conversation we had over here in IT. This is what resonated with them. This is what didn't. And is that a pattern? Is that something we need to hop onto and change? Okay, yes. How are we going to do that and get those action? And then for the other persona, seemed to work so far. Let's try it again next week and see if we can create some repetition there. So, having that kind of internal checkpoint and validation of, who are you talking to? What are you learning? Especially if you're selling to a bunch of different personas, I think is really critical in some of those early days. So you can understand if you're working with a data point of one or a trend that you need to address. And so then translating all of the verbal work into digital and print and whatnot, I think Ophir said something about consistency. That becomes pretty important, and particularly as teams grow as well. So because we've had an established product and we added a new product, we do have a marketing team of 5 people. Not very big, but maybe bigger than some startups. And so I created this process of a clearinghouse of messaging because we're moving so quickly. And again, we're getting that data in real time. You need to make sure that everybody's staying on message and kind of in the know for the latest and greatest. And so it's certainly an extra step in the process, but it creates an opportunity to say, hey, that banner ad isn't quite exactly reflecting what we just learned. We need to kind of tweak that a little bit. Or, the salesperson went off the reservation a little bit and decided to create a new slide that's not quite matching what we learned and whatnot. And so I found that really helps me connect the dots between all the conversations and then all the work that's happening within the organization. And then it just builds a muscle that people then can practice and say, all right, let me double check with, the salesperson, sales lead on this product, make sure that I'm aligned. Let me check with product to make sure these are, still the features or the coming features that are prioritization. And then that way it can be more consistent across all of those different channels and different types of communications.
Interesting. Yeah.
I do have a comment here that I think that the best way is through a referral. So if you get somebody else to say, you should talk to, in our case, it's the diamond people, because we're using diamonds and nobody else does. So just having the ability to be sensitive to what seemed to be a way to have your message propagate. I don't want to talk about diamonds. I don't want to talk about what we're using in terms of the technology, but it seems to be a great hook to start a conversation and have somebody else tell our story on our behalf. And that seemed to be very effective for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the startups I've spoken to have a problem that they want to solve, and they know that they're supposed to just talk about the problem. But oftentimes it becomes very easy to get distracted by the things that are shiny. That's why we tend to hear a lot of pitches as virtual reality for X, or we're doing X on the blockchain, because a lot of people really want to talk about the shiny thing. But as I think every single person here, in fact, these two both have companies that utilize blockchain, and they haven't mentioned blockchain once, which I love, by the way. But so that's a common theme. It's very difficult to not get distracted by the stuff that's shiny, and really, as I think we've all spoken a lot about, stay true to what is the problem you're trying to solve. So now I want to take it back to Nimit. So, and I also want to bring up Allison's consistency message. So, Nimit, you've received quite a bit of press. Most of it that I could find was positive, but there was definitely some negative press. And I could imagine it could be very tempting when people say negative stuff about you to want to say things that might go back on messaging or other stuff, but you've managed to stay pretty consistent the entire time through, and you've, from what I can tell, dealt with it well. So my question for you is, how do you deal, one, with naysayers, and two, with consistency, you know, just making sure to stay true when naysayers naysay?
So in our case, due to the nature of the work and the industry we are in, this has been a significant, if not one of the biggest challenges we faced. So when we did our first governmental election last year, the primary in West Virginia, and prior to that, for a couple of years, we were under the radar. And we felt like we could just keep continuing that way and postpone the PR and everything till we had more money and more resources.
What's the PR?
So public relations,
Oh, that PR.
press, handling the press and the naysayers. And so as fate would have it, summer of last year, CNN wrote an article on us and it went viral, and there was a lot of negative press and a lot of negative wrong stuff on Twitter, which completely caught us off guard, and we didn't know. Those were probably the longest days in the company. It was really hard, and we realized that unlike most other companies in our stage, we needed professional help. So we hired a full-time PR firm, which is expensive, but we needed it. And through working with them, we realized that it's important to stay on message and try and weed off the distractions. And whatever you're doing, you'll always have critics, and you have basically two choices. You can respond to them directly in a defensive way, or you can keep doing what you do and let your work speak for yourself in a positive way and have other people talk about it, like Ofer said. So essentially that's what we did. Fortunately, we've had a lot of successful elections since then. Our customers talk a lot more about us than we ever do. And so that's really helped us. And we still keep our heads down and just keep working and let our PR firm and influencers help us. That being said, we continue to feel outnumbered and outmaneuvered almost every time a negative press hits about us, which is pretty much every week. And so we are now in the process of evolving to the next stage as a company, where we kind of take our public relations and media activity to kind of level 2. So we are still learning, but we learned it the hard way, that you can't really fight with the critics on Twitter or Facebook. You're not going to win that war. So you have to be very strategic, focused, stay on message, and as far as possible, let your work speak for itself, and have other people talk about you. And the best people to talk about you in a positive way are good customers.
So on the notion of allowing work to speak for itself, Nimit and Ophir, I've pitched ideas before, and I've pitched pretty out there ideas. I mean, we're calling this panel complex innovation, but really we were trying to find a better word for saying like way out there ideas. What we're doing is, again, we're not, you guys aren't selling Uber for this. It requires, a level of understanding. And what I've noticed when pitching things to anyone, just at a bar or at a coffee shop, is that 50% of people will say, no, that's just not how the world works. People would never do this. They wouldn't act that way. And the other 50% say, I love that. I will be your first customer. And so it's very hard to actually, with these way out there ideas, to get good feedback. Are you going in the right direction? So how do you deal with the variability of people's responses to your products?
So I guess, I don't know if we figured out that completely, but what seemed to be consistently working very well for us is showing a demo, showing how the product works. And from that point on, the conversation is significantly easier And we're using a card demo, so we have a deck of cards that each card has diamonds on it, so it has a unique identity. And then we can identify those cards without looking at the back side or the front side. That seemed to be an extraordinarily efficient, within 90 seconds, we can get the point across, oh, you can identify things that look exactly the same. And from that point on, we just, depending on what is the persona, whether it's a supply chain security person or somebody from quality control or somebody from cybersecurity that are interested in our solution. And then, but you provided them with a hook that they understand the technology without telling them that we're putting quantum defects inside the diamond, which is completely not relevant and not important. At the end of the day, the technology is supposed to disappear, right? You're supposed to be just a medium to connect them to the value and being able to pull that value.
Yeah, I would I would kind of echo that sentiment. I think it's still work in progress for us. I remember early on, this was more than 3.5 years ago, when we had just done our first election, and I was talking to a woman at a music concert where I started telling her what I did, and her instant reaction was, "Oh, I'm never going to use your system because I don't trust it." And I was speechless. Like, it was such a visceral thing to hear, but it was helpful because it made me realize that trust is really hard to gain, especially in the space we are in. And that kind of helped in sort of understanding how do you earn trust. You can't earn trust overnight, especially in elections, given what happened in 2016 and what we hear in the media and the news pretty much every day. And so how do you go about something like this? So it's basically baby steps. We dissected our market into multiple small segments, and then picked the segment which had the least, the maximum number of problems, basically the least number of people voting. So military voters, overseas citizens, disability community. And we started leading with that, because it's hard for a critic to tell us, I'm not gonna let you make it easier for an overseas military personnel or a disabled citizen to vote, regardless of your perspective on cybersecurity. So that helped kind of cool down the argument a little bit, and then we could make more solid arguments to say why this makes sense. We're not advocating that every citizen in the country use this on day one. We want to get there maybe in 6 years, maybe in 8 years, where it's worth trying. It's such a hard problem. If you don't begin, it's never going to get solved. And so let us try, let us pilot it. And if it doesn't work, you don't have to use it. But if it works, then you can say something nice about us for a change. And so that's pretty much, we call it the baby step approach. And we've been doing that. It's hard, it's a long slog. It's very anti-startup, because startups are supposed to go 0 to 1000x in like 1 year nowadays. But we purposefully chose a slower path, more thoughtful, and I think that in many industries is worth consideration, not just in our industry.
We could make the argument you're going retro startup. Anyone here familiar with lean startup methodology? Eric Ries? The basis of that is you continually iterate on something. So you have an idea, you try it instantly, and while people have sort of taken that to the next step, which is an iteration should take a day, and if you take longer than a day, you're just too slow moving, and we move fast and break things. That's sort of the newer, let's say 5 to 7 year interpretation of it. But really, retro startup, I think, would agree with you. And I actually think pure lean startup, and for any of you who haven't read it, it's Lean Startup by Eric Ries, but I think it's a pretty now classic motto of how to look at startups, and it's a very good one. Would you say you're following Lean Startup?
I think in some ways we did, but when it came to selling, pitching to investors, we definitely went retro. Just to give you an example, we didn't raise money until we had our first pay. Actually, we didn't start pitching to investors until we had our first paying customer. And it was very important to us because a lot of people told us that was the wrong thing to do, and we felt like, no, if we can't get a paying customer, then we don't have validation. And I, in my head, can't justify pitching to an investor, so how am I going to convince an investor? And so that was really, really helpful. I think anybody who's thinking of starting their own company or business out there should seriously consider that. In today's age, before you go pitch to an investor, make sure you pitch to a customer, get them to get on board, pay you even if it's a little bit of money, because that really will help you later on instead of doing it the other way around.
On that note, I have a question for Dan. So with Alice, there's just so much it can do. And so the idea of following Lean Startup and just iterating, each iteration there's maybe 1,000 different things you can do. So I guess my question is, how do you figure out what's next? And if it's something that's sellable or is it just a feature in the background?
Yeah, I mean, so it's just a little bit of context. So Alice is a B2B gifting platform, but when I joined Alice 18 months ago, it still wasn't even yet that, because it was gifting for anybody in any circumstance, anywhere, right? Classic, like, everlasting gobstopper view of your own technology, single founder. And Greg, you know, if you're watching this somewhere afterwards, I apologize that may have sounded harsh. But like, one of the things I think that we wanted to do is we wanted to, and this point was made very well actually, is focus, right? So there was no pivot. It was not like, we're not building a new technology or necessarily even trying to solve different pains for people, but it's, well, okay, yes, this gifting can be done in the B2C world and the B2B world. Let's focus on the B2B world. Okay, now we're in the B2B world. There's prospecting, there's customer gifting, there's gifting that you can be doing for your employees. These are all incredibly different ways that gifting happens, and then those use cases dictate a lot of different things that the technology needs to be able to do. At its core, the technology was replicating a very thoughtful human action that someone would take and then able to replicate that at scale. That is I want you to appreciate the thing I'm going to get you, and I will research your background on social media. I will go and find something great for you, and I will get you that gift. And even better yet, if you don't like that one, you can choose something better that you would like, right? And then taking that and doing that at scale, right? So that's a fundamental action that's being taken. But where do we monetize that action? What are we building around that action that allows there to be value derived? And the early days of the company, there was a question of, is this company going to make money on the transactions? A lot of gifting happening all over the place, and Alice gets to take a little slice? Or is it going to make money as a SaaS platform? You have to subscribe to have Alice do all of this work for you to make your life easy, and then you can charge a fee for a sales team to be able to do that. And so it was only through the act of us doing some experimentation, talking to some folks, selling it. I mean, some of these first sales conversations that we had were like, hey, will you pay $10,000 for this? They're like, for a month? We're like, for a year, not a month. Who would possibly assume that was the monthly pricing? So you have to like figure these things out. You have to try. And I would say that one of the things you have to try is you have to try to figure out sooner how much someone is willing to pay rather than how little. Because at the very, very beginning, to just get somebody to invest in your company, show that anybody is willing to pay anything. But soon after that, you realize how much freaking cash you're burning, and you need to have people paying as much value that you can derive. So rather than going in and trying to figure out how little we could get people to pay, we went in very early and said, well, what is the most that we can get people to pay? Or better yet, what is the right value that we can get for our solution, and then who looks like that? And that's how we then settled on the prospecting use case for mid to large size companies. So which is a very specific set of the tech software market that we're going after. There's only like 2,000 companies right now that we're even trying to sell to. So that doesn't mean that we won't build things that many other companies will be able to derive value from. That'll be even at lower price points potentially for smaller companies to come in on. But where we are right now, that's kind of what we need to build. So that's kind of why we went there.
Great. So on that note, I actually have a question for Allison, but I'd like everyone to feel free to jump in. So Allison, you actually came on relatively early on a new platform that your company was launching. So my question for you, so for Allison, for Allison specifically, I got confused because you're working on a company called Alice.
That's true. That is true. That can get
And
confusing.
so,
It'd be even worse if her name was Alice.
and so, Allison, how do you look at technology and innovation early on and say, wow, this is something innovative, I want to work there? And to sort of extrapolate that to also our founders, how do you communicate to people that, one, the problem is, we've spoken a lot about the problem, but once you've convinced people about the problem, how do you convince them that your solution is innovative? So first, I'm going to repeat that question in a bit, but I want you guys to be able to think about it. Allison, can you tell us about how you knew that you wanted to work at a place and that it was innovative?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so as a marketer, the thing I think is most important about choosing what company to go to next, where you're gonna spend your time, spend your energy, is really around product market fit. Because if that isn't there, you can do everything right in marketing and you're never gonna help your sales team sell a thing. And so really I think it comes down to exactly what most of the folks have said here today, is looking to understand what is the market saying about the idea, about the product. Are there folks who are signing up to be early adopters, who have latched on to the beta program, who have said, yes, I think there's value in this and I would pay for this, whether it's $10,000 or, $100,000. And being able to say, all right, so if there's that there, then my job as a marketer is gonna be a lot easier because there is already proof in the marketplace that there are legs around this offering, that the value is there, that then we can turn up an engine and be able to then amplify that message, to do it at scale, and hopefully see the growth that you would expect to see once you turn on that faucet. So that product market fit, being able to have that validation that there's a problem that's being solved and that somebody's willing to pay for it.
Right. Anyone else want to jump in to that? I saw a bunch of you going like, yeah.
Yeah, I think to your question about how do you get other people to buy into your idea and believe in what you're doing is the right way to do it. I think that's one of the really hard things to do, and continues to be. Hiring new people, I'm sure all of us are familiar with the challenges there. And I think early on you have to find the true believers. And so that's, in a sense, very similar to pitching to investors or pitching to customers. You also have to pitch to your prospective team members and get them to believe in the idea, believe in the mission, believe in your solution. And they will, depending on the kind of people you want to attract, these could be technology people or non-technology people, and once again, you have to adjust your pitch. So if you, I think, don't do that, then it becomes really, really hard beyond a certain point, because you need people to scale, and attracting good, talented people is one of the hardest things for a startup, especially in Boston when there's so much competition.
Yeah, I would add that when you're pitching employees, right, and I think it's important that people understand generally what the company does. But if it's not necessarily like another co-founder that you're trying to bring on, you really need them to be a true believer, true evangelist, because they're going to need to be through the thick and thin. I think that to this whole complex innovation challenge that we all have, I think that selling people on the values that you have as a company is something that I think can go a lot farther than making somebody understand kind of like how the technology solves the problems, so that what they really believe in is what they see as a reflection of themselves and their values, and how that is going to be fulfilling for them. It was a huge thing I learned going between my previous company and this company, where we worked really hard at the beginning in a way that I found like kind of frustrating, because I was like, we really need to figure out how to sell this product, and we're talking a lot about the values that we have as a company. I don't quite know if that is the right use of our time. And it turned out that it was an amazing use of our time, because while we were figuring out product market fit, which was that was like a journey at the beginning kind of year, I would say, we were then unclear, right, how we were going to be pitching it every single day, but we were very clear about what type of person we wanted to join the company. And so the right people found us before we even knew who we wanted to be. And that has served us really well. We've got people that are loyal, we've got great loyalty, and we go out and we just talk out in the Boston community, and we just like talk about just our values. That's all we talk about to people, you know? And the biggest one that we have, which I like your diamonds thing a lot, by the way, I want to talk more about that, is giving first and giving consistently, right? And so trying to live that out, like that encourages us to, all of us at Alice, to live out the idea that, hey, if you go out and you put out into the world, you're going to then get back from doing that. That obviously, in a subtle way, also ties into what we are doing with our company, where we want people to take giving actions. But it's been really powerful to be able to go out there and talk about that, talk about the social mission that we partner with companies to help promote, talk about people's things that they're interested in their own lives that bring them to have a common interest together as part of the Alice team, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, if I could have gone back and done that at Seismic, because I feel like that gives kind of soul to the company, and also really gives teeth to the pitch about why do you want to be here.
So I would just add that, at the end of the day, it's about finding the people, at least at the company our size, over 16 people. It's about the cultural fit. There's an assumption that people will have the right technical understanding of their particular assignments, if they're programmers or salespeople. But at the end of the day, if they don't believe, if they don't share the same common values, they're not going to pitch to the right customer. They're not going to try to sell the right product, and they're not going to bring the value that we want to bring to the customers. So.
Great. So, Dan, I want to ask you a question. So you've shown yourself to definitely be one of our more energetic people today, which is awesome. And so you're also obviously very passionate about Alice. My question is, so actually let me give a story. My first job out of college was as a financial analyst, and I hated it. So telling people what I did, and even though I worked, I got commissions, just the act of selling people on this bank that I worked for was pure torture. So my question for you, Dan, is you're clearly connected to Alice. Can you sell, and this is actually open to everyone, but is it more difficult to sell a product that you don't have a personal connection with? How important is that personal connection to selling it well?
Oh my gosh, it's so helpful, right? I mean, the reason I wouldn't have left, Seismic is this, I don't know if anyone has heard of the company Seismic. This is like, complete kind of rocket ship company. They're doing extremely well. To leave that, which was a lot of fun, but to go back to an early stage, I needed to have something that I was going to be extremely passionate about and really fundamentally, I think, understood and felt. If I was going to be one of these early employees, I really did need to be really drinking the Kool-Aid. And I do remember actually early days at Seismic. So Seismic has built a solution that is predominantly used by much larger companies. Okay, at the early days of being at Seismic, we were way too small for our own technology. That sucks, because I do remember very specifically being in my kitchen Friday night, drinking a glass of wine after a very long week of work, and going and having this like Holden Caulfield moment where I was like, I'm a phony. Like I don't even know if our technology is actually good. And it turned out it was actually really good. I just didn't know it, right? And then joining a company like Alice, where I'd been as in my role, I was on the receiving end of a lot of people reaching out to me trying to get my attention and sell to me. And a lot of people would send me things, and they were always generic and crappy, and I would throw them in the trash. And it was just this like bother. I was just always bothered and annoyed by it, And then Alice comes along and this idea that, oh my gosh, like I could get this like highly curated thing just for this person, and we could do that at scale. I was like, this is amazing. This solves an actual real pain in the market. And I know, because I've been in this role, I know that companies spend a shit ton of money on this. So that is going to probably be a good idea to try to work at that company. Like that was generally the, so I didn't have to have this like existential crisis while I was like 2 years into the job. Rather it was like, oh, I fundamentally understood that. And I do think to the extent that you can, so I would say that in order to even just like start working at an early stage company where you might not be as familiar with the technology, it's a telling sign, both I think for the strength of your own character and being able to sleep at night, and I think for like the quality of the leadership team, if you're going to be joining that team, to ask them in the process of you joining, in a polite way, but like, hey, is it okay if I talk to a couple of your customers? Because what you want to know is like, is this freaking legit or not? Like, is this solving a real pain that these companies are having or not? Because if you're not going to be able to learn it through the act of just your own life, you might kind of wake up in a cold sweat.
Great. So now I want to ask the audience a question, because my next question depends on our audience makeup. Who here is thinking about joining an accelerator or an incubator or a startup studio? Okay, that looks like about a third of you, which I'm going to say makes this question relevant. So my question is for Nimit. You have been a part of both Mass Challenge and Techstars Boston, which are arguably the two largest accelerators in Boston. I think a lot of people are familiar with how startup accelerators, incubators, all of them help people raise money. I don't think they realize how deep a lot of these places go with helping you tell a story and your marketing. Can you tell us about that? And am I wrong? Do they not help with that? Were they only good with funding, or do they help you tell the story?
No, you're absolutely correct. For us, so we got selected for the 2017 Boston Techstars class, and that was a life-changing experience for us. It was like doing a 3-month intense entrepreneurship MBA. We didn't probably sleep more than 2-3 hours a day. So it was very intense, but we learned pretty much everything from how to find the right kind of mentor, how to narrow the focus on the sales side, how to scale the technology, how to handle critics. And so it was, besides the fundraising and pitching training, it was immensely helpful. And when we subsequently got selected for Mass Challenge, we were actually lucky that we were able to use Mass Challenge in a very efficient way because we had gone through a very intense process prior. So we cherry-picked and used Mass Challenge where we needed most, was to find prospective customers, prospective governmental clients, and I would say getting into a top-tier accelerator is one of the best things you can do for your startup, both from a learning and from the mentorship opportunities. The money is a nice to have, I would say, if you can get it well and good. The other aspects are really, really important.
Great, thanks. My last question before we open it up to Q&A from the audience is, if someone in the audience today, if they're having trouble selling their startup, explaining their vision, what are some things they can do? This is for any one of you.
I would try to break it down, break the story down, try to say, okay, who's you trying to solve a problem for somebody. So identify that persona and then walk on telling a story about how that persona is going to benefit from the use of the technology or the use of the product. But I think that it's much easier to break it down into the individual chapters of that story and then try to address and poll your friends or people that you know on those specific elements. Because it could be that, for example, in our in our story, we're dealing with counterfeits. So one of the problems that exist there is that you have counterfeit products. It could be a battery, and that battery can explode. So there's a safety or a security concern there. If I would mention counterfeit in my pitch in certain scenarios, for example, talking with prime contractors in the defense, I will finish the conversation. There's no way for me to proceed because once I said counterfeits, they're going to put us in a certain category and they're going to have the corporate answer and I won't be able to get my point across. So it's just being able to identify that maybe there's some specific words that you shouldn't use or specific words that you should use. Try to avoid AI and blockchains as much as you can. So that's my comment.
I think Allison.
Yeah, happy to comment on that as well. I've always found a good exercise is to talk to my mom and try to have her explain back to me what she thinks that my company does, what do we do, what value do we bring, because my mom has never been in tech. She doesn't use a lot of tech, but if she can walk away and tell her friends, okay, my daughter does this and say it in a couple of sentences, I know I've gotten to the essence of what it is that we do and the value that we can bring. So it's always a good exercise, and I encourage my marketers to practice that as well, because we can get caught up in the bits and the bytes and the the big shiny things that we talked about before, but ultimately we've got to be able to tell a broader story, and to your point earlier, be able to have that story carry forward without us taking it ourselves. So we need somebody else to be the bearer of that.
I don't know Allison's mother, but I can definitely say if any of you can actually tell your parents what you're working on, that is an accomplishment. It's not as easy as you think. It really isn't. Even, I've been saying Uber for X as if that's the easiest thing to describe. But imagine Travis Kalanick telling his mother or father about Uber. It's very, very difficult no matter what you're doing. So if you can, I think this is probably one of the best pieces of advice we've gotten today. If you can actually explain to a parent, job well done. I'm still trying to do that. I've been in startup land for years. I don't think my parents have any idea what I do. Anyone else have advice for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, so what's interesting about about Alice in particular is that we don't like to think of ourselves as a direct mail company because that just sounds old and like not innovative. And the problem is that's kind of what our customers think of us as, a really badass new way for them to execute their direct mail campaigns. And what I really have come to appreciate about the word direct mail is that there is a line item budget that already exists for it at a lot of companies. And I think that a challenge that a lot of us have is wanting so hard to build our differentiation into the initial thing we want people to know about us, which is not in anybody's existing budgeted line item ever, that we forget that we just first want people to put us in the right damn bucket so that we get routed to the right person at the company so that then we can give them the right pitch and then talk about the differentiation. So knowing kind of like where you are in that positioning exercise and who you're trying to get their attention and just which route you're supposed to go down, then you give somebody the assets that they need in the selling process to differentiate and then to do the demo and to talk about some of the speeds and feeds that'll actually win you the business. But just don't be afraid of the existing line item budget, even if it seems like it's not who you want to be.
Great. So now is one of my favorite parts. We're going to open it up to audience Q&A. Just raise your hand, and we're going to try this without the microphone. I think we have a small enough room. So you had your hand raised. Do you want to stand up and ask a question?
Sure. Hey, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. So I have one really quick one, just because you said you avoid the word counterfeit. Can you just tell us the word that you did use, and then the other is more broadly. So can you talk a lot about talking about